The Drum Candy podcast is brought to you by Drum Factory Direct.
What's up, everyone? Welcome into episode 39 of the Drum Candy podcast. This is your host, Mike Dawson, coming to you from Drum Factory Direct in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This week's guest is the great Adam Deitch. Adam is a prolific drummer, composer, producer, co-band leader. He's also an educator. He has a great educational site called Deitch Academy. Check that out, where he teaches a lot of funk and hip hop and jazz basics and some more detailed stuff on soloing. It's a really, really nice instructional course. Go check that out. Again, that's the Deitch Academy. And also, he's always working on new projects. So this conversation talks about everything from how he composes music and then selecting his band members and how he's, just keeps himself constantly busy. We talk about some gear, and we did take a pretty deep dive into the classics of hip hop and funk. So let's get into it. The great Adam Deitch. You're in Denver.
Yeah, for about 6 years.
How was the pandemic there?
Luckily, one of the clubs stayed open. Cervantes, which is owned by my friend Scott Morrill, who's a big supporter of all the music in Denver, and he loves watching groups kind of take shape in his club and then go on to Red Rocks and that kind of thing. So he really helped us out with that and kind of kept the club open. And I basically had one or two shows per month at that club during the whole pandemic. And social distanced and about 40 people in a 1,000-seat room, but there was still something to look forward to. Yeah, so I had the gigs, and I started the Deitch Academy, which is like a lesson site. Yeah, it's my little Drumeo.
Yeah, definitely want to talk about that because I dug through the whole site.
Yeah. I did that. I did a bunch of private lessons, a bunch of online Zoom lessons that really went well. I really enjoyed them, met a bunch of great drummers, and had some young kids, 9-year-olds. And I never really taught kids before that. So that was also a fun experience, and watching them come back next week and be excited about it. And they learn what you taught them last week and all that stuff, all that fun stuff. So.
Have you always taught some? Or was it just necessity?
Have you
always taught lessons? Was that always something you did, or was that just something recent?
I was on the faculty at the New School in New York when I lived there, and I was an adjunct professor where they'd see like a list of musicians in New York, and kids would pick you based on this, if they knew who you were or whatever. And every semester I'd have 2 to 3 students, college students, and that was a good experience. A couple of those kids became, well-known drummers and got out in the world and did their thing, and which is always a good feeling. And my parents are both college professors, and my mom did elementary school for years, for her whole life, and has her master's in teaching. So I grew up in a teacher household, and that's so it's kind of fun for me to take the parts that I learned from them that they do well, and then add a little of my flavor into teaching.
So how much of your upbringing was self-taught versus them teaching you specifically?
I mean, them both being music teachers and drummers and piano players, I had tons of lessons available. Their friends were in their bands, were all great musicians, and they would show me things. So it was a constant learning environment. And then it was like I shut everything they tried to teach me out, and I just wanted to play with records and play with hip hop records and kind of do it my own way. And they let me do my thing and didn't really force me, do your drum etudes this week. It wasn't like that kind of house. It was like, if that's what you're into, if you want to play along with Public Enemy and KRS-One records all day, go ahead, And that to me was rebelling, but still practicing.
Yeah. You probably didn't realize how much they were teaching you by letting you do that.
Exactly. They're just the ultimate with just letting you find your path.
Nice.
Sort of thing.
Well, let's talk about, I feel like you're always starting new projects. What is the current new project? Is it because I don't know which the Butterfly Quintet, and I saw there's a word trio record that just came out. You've got your own quartet. What's the latest?
Well, during the pandemic, there was a bunch of like untapped talent. Well, talent, really talented individuals and good friends of mine that I never got a chance to play with in a setting, sort of like with the Weather Report setting, except 2 horns instead of 1. So no guitar. All my bands have guitar. It was fun to be in a band without guitar. And Break Science kind of evolved into Butterfly Quintet with horns. And we have Dom from Big Gigantic, who's great. And so that's the Butterfly Quintet, and where we cut that record. I found a great engineer and also a good friend in Denver named Josh Fairman, who has recorded about 6 or 7 different projects of mine over the past 2 years, maybe more. But we have a group called Nightcap, which is a trio, a sort of like neo-soul jazz trio, the style of Kiefer and Robert Glasper, I guess, to pigeonhole it. A little bit more electronic based. But that's coming out, and then the Butterfly record's coming out soon. We got a bunch of gigs. The quartet we cut right after we cut the Lettuce record, which is the next Lettuce record coming out. Dr. Claw, which is New Orleans like funk with Ian Neville and Nick Daniels and Nigel Hall and some other guests. So there's a bunch of stuff happening, and then my solo stuff, which is like production based, Jay Dilla based stuff, and I'm playing all the instruments and sampling and stuff.
Man, how do you keep track of it all?
I have a good manager. Hillary Clinton is her name actually, and she's an amazing manager, and she helps organize all the releases. And okay, this has to get mastered. This album cover has to be chosen. This merch idea for this album. All those things that come with a release that a label would just charge you an arm and a leg for. We just kind of talk about it and do it ourselves. And my goal is to have these releases stay up with my output, because I have a lot of ideas and tunes that I write that I just want to continue releasing. So until these albums are out and organized in an organized fashion, it's hard for me to work on new stuff. So, it's good to have a good manager for that.
So you're the band leader for all these various projects?
I wouldn't say that. Obviously for the quartet, that's my thing with my name on it. But no, they're all co-led. They're all friends that I know. The co-leading thing has worked for me. The Lettuce idea of all of us owning the company and Break Science, with it being a total 50-50 split, has ended up being better in the long run, and of course you're going to run into some arguments and stuff, but at the end of the day, we all have the same vision for what, if you align with people's visions and they're good people and you've hung out with them through the recording process of the record, and a couple of the bands I haven't even done a gig with yet, like the Nightcap project, the trio thing. We haven't even done a live show really, yet. So, but I already know that these guys are completely 100% into it and understand how it's going to fit into my schedule, and they're cool with that. And it's a great vibe. So I just, I enjoy doing new projects with people that match my intensity and my eagerness to get the music out.
So where's the material come from? Is everyone writing?
Everyone's writing. I do a large amount of writing. It's like a tsunami of tunes. And then they usually come back with, well, we got these tunes, and I love that, the pushback, I'm willing to write as much as needed, and I'm getting to a point now where I feel fairly confident if it's in my bag. I can't go write an Ariana Grande tune, not the, that's going to be a hit song all across the world. But if it's a funky tune with some cool chords and a nice melody that people can walk away humming, and a great groove and a great bass line, that's a fastball down the middle for me. So I enjoy that.
So for what is a finished tune for you? Is it a bass line, a groove, chords, and a melody? I mean, how finished do you give it to the guys?
An A section with a melody.
Yep.
And a great groove. a B section, hopefully. If you're going to get fancy, you're going to add a solo section, which is slightly different. You know, a bridge, which might be totally different from those, or not. You know, I look at tunes like, you know, there's James Brown tunes where it's like, you know, a big payback where it's got the intro groove and then it's got the big main groove, and that hangs for a while. I love that kind of song form. You know, other things like a classic Maceo tune, or so you know, it depends on the format. I just like simple formats that work live and aren't like overly analyzed or thought about in the studio and are impossible to play live. You know, I think of things ahead of time so we can play the record and it's not going to be like, oh, we have this orchestral breakdown, this part that's in 13/11, and you know, you know, which is cool for other things, but I just like to be able to play it all live and have it make sense.
So then how does it evolve? Do the harmonies change once you get with the band? Do you give like skeleton chords? I mean, how does the tunes evolve?
I do demos on Pro Tools. I spend all day and all night on Pro Tools if I'm inspired with a song, you know, and I'll record it as best I can, you know, using some looped sections. I'm obviously not going to play bass for 5 minutes straight through. So I'll play, you know, a couple bars, loop that, and then I'll go to the other section, play a couple bars. And sometimes I'll play the bass for 100 bars till I find those 2 bars that are really happening. And I'll chop those and put those, you know, layer them next to each other. And I want to send the guys a demo that they get excited about. You know, whoever I'm working with, that they go, wow, this is a great tune. I want to play on this. That's the goal. That's the win. And if they're into it and they want to cut it, they're going to have that energy and they're going to learn the parts and maybe add something extra. And I'm always open to it.
Do you program the drums, or you cut some live drums on top of it?
I've done both. I've had better luck with live drums on demos, because it just adds to the vibe and it's me, and it, you know, it just feels better when they're hearing it for the first time. They're like, ooh, I can imagine the chords, you know, I want to play on that, or that, you know, instead of that being a synth melody, it'll be a sax and a trumpet or something, you know. So that's my goal with writing and, you know, making sure that I have as many live instruments, like a real Rhodes, a real bass, real drums, guitar, you know, as opposed to all MIDI instruments, which ends up sounding like a robot demo, which is cool if you don't play anything else. But for me, it's like, it's worth the time to try to beat out the 3 chords on guitar, because it'll just sound better to the guitar player, and he'll go, oh, I hear what you're trying to do there. You know, like Schmeens from Lettuce. That's kind of how he approaches the demos, you know.
So has there ever been like an idea that you kind of get halfway there and you're like, this isn't working, let me can this, and just bag it? Like a project, not necessarily a tune, but like, has there been like, oh, I want to do this project, and then, or do you take it all the way to the end?
If I love something, I'll take it, you know, I'll take it to the, you know, to the recording process at least. You know, I've never gotten to a point where I recorded a whole album and went, this sucks, you know, or like, if I'm going to the studio and I'm paying studio time, I feel very confident about the players and the tunes and the studio engineer and where we're at, you know, and that's the only way I'll spend my own money, is if I feel confident on all those factors. And that's worked out for me, you know, because back in the day I had bands that were great with great tunes, and I was like, oh, I probably shouldn't spend, you know, $2,000 to record this band because it's a lot of money, and you know, what if I don't make it back? And, you know, but now if I can go back and tell my young self, just spend that money and go in the studio with those guys and record that thing, everything else will fall into place.
So what do you have at home that you do demos with?
I have Pro Tools.
Do you have like a acoustic kit mic'd up at all times?
I have 3 kits in my basement.
Okay. What are the kits?
I have all Tama.
Are they
I
like?
have the Tama Funky kit, which is like a Frankenstein kit of different drums they've sent me over the years that I just love. And I have a 60s kind of 20-inch boomier, jazzier kit. And then I have a baby junk kit with like a floor tom for a bass drum and a 10-inch snare and some weird hats with holes in them. Like they're this big, it's perfect for like a little Questlove breakbeat kind of vibe thing, jungle drumming type kit,
So do ideas come to you when you're at the kit, or do you hear an idea and then you know which kit to go to?
That's a great question. A lot of it is me sitting down on one of them and playing for a while and having no agenda. I might just, try to blow some Aaron Spears chops for a minute just to get my arms warm and tire myself out a little bit. So I'm not antsy on the kit trying to play too many fills. So I'll just start off just chopping relentlessly 30-second note. How long can I keep 30-second notes going? Different combos, and still come out on one, that kind of just a game, it's like Guitar Hero or something, I'm hopefully trying to pull some of these things out at Lettuce shows, but not too much of it. But then you eventually fall into a groove, right? After you do that.
Right.
Your arms get a little tired. And I feel like I want to lay a groove down. And that groove that happens after that initial energy outburst is usually a tune to me, And I feel like a lot of drummers do come up with those grooves, but they don't record them on their phone. They don't take them seriously. I had a great groove at my shed session today, but I didn't record it. He's like, if you don't record it, how do you write that tune? Because that beat, it could be the great, the gravy. It could be like the rice that everything is put on top of, the pasta. So it's all food. It's all cooking, man. I'm always going back and forth.
Right. So what do? You just like pull up the voice memo app or something and just get it down? Doesn't matter what the quality. Absolutely. Really.
That, or I do the video. I'll do the video just so I can remember what the groove looked like and the way the sun was shining through the window that day or whatever, so I can remember it. I literally have to go through my phone and I have about 500 voice memos and videos of like grooves that should be Lettuce tunes or someone else or one of these other project tunes. Oh, I also cut another record. It's called Mountain Lion with two of the guys from Motet, Joey Porter on keys and Garrett Sayers on bass, who's like just a phenomenal bass player. And we never got to really play together. And Shmeens from Lettuce is in that as well. And it's sort of another collaboration project that wouldn't have happened if the pandemic never happened.
How did that come about? You just like reached out like, hey, you want to do something? And then you're off to the races?
Yeah, well, we had that opportunity to play at Cervantes over the break, at the club and do a couple hits. And they were really great and they felt really great. Playing funk in a hornless situation was different for me. So I was always writing for horns and this, horns and that. And so like play grooves where it's basically like, the Herbie approach, which is like, you're not, although even though Herbie had a sax player, he had Benny Maupin on all his records, all his funk records. But I guess, the Meters were a hornless funk band. Prince's stuff is, for the most part, mostly synth horns. And so we're incorporating the vocoder and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's a whole other sound and different project. So I'm going to have different instrumentation and slightly different types of songwriting. And the instrumentation to me dictates the songwriting and the players and what they're capable of.
So go back to when you get that initial idea at your kit. Are you already hearing bass lines and stuff at that point? Are you humming to yourself, or does that come later?
Yeah, I'm definitely hearing bass lines in my head, either right after I play the groove, or I'll listen to the voice memo and automatically start humming a bass line. And then I'll go to the next voice memo and record that bass line. And I'll say, bass line for the beat that I just recorded, something like that. And then the next voice memo might be horn line for that, or guitar part, So that's where I'm at with capturing those inspirational moments, because those are more, those come to you naturally, and they feel the most natural for people to play at the end of the day.
So when do you know to take it to Pro Tools?
When I'm really excited, it's like, I gotta get to Pro Tools now, whether it's 3 a.m. or whatever. I gotta go, some of them just, if it's for a group and we're going to the studio soon, that's when I'm most at my highest peak of writing, because I'm excited to go into the studio to play these tunes for possibly the first time. Like the entire Adam Deitch quartet record that we just cut, the guys had never really heard the tunes before. They got in. The horn players, or the keyboard player did his work, did his homework. Will Blades, he actually heard the demos, but they didn't even listen to the demos. So I kind of get excited for that, because it's kind of fresh, and I play with great musicians that can interpret very quickly and on the fly, and I trust their musical output. Do
you give them charts, or they learn by ear?
I had no charts, and they were pissed. They were totally pissed. They had to write. Benny Bloom, the trumpet player who is in Lettuce and also in my quartet, he literally had to sit there and chart on the session before each song. He's cursing me out that whole session, but we were laughing. We were laughing about it.
Oh man! So what I noticed about all your records is, you mentioned it, the sound of the studio, the sound of the room, the experience of listening to it. It feels like it's just as intentional as the compositions and the playing. Like for the quartet record, it's like a very ambient sound. I'm wondering what that inspiration was to go for like that kind of roomy sound.
Yeah, for the quartet record, I was going 1968 Idris Muhammad. Like the records that he played on before he was even doing solo. I mean, he's got some solo records that are kind of that open sound. Definitely Rudy Van Gelder is my idol for jazz recording. I mean, he's like the number one producer of jazz music, of classic stuff. And you could hear on those Elvin records, like, you don't hear any reverb, but then he hits hard and that reverb opens up because he had his high ceilings. And so I was obviously I was recording in like little Brooklyn studios that didn't have high ceilings, but I try to recreate a little bit of that ambiance, and try to get an old school reverb with a plate, like an actual plate reverb, and not like a plug-in reverb thing, Plugins can be cool nowadays. I mean, they're getting so deep with the plugins, and it's modeled after certain rooms and having the same dirt as the rooms. I just like that old school, like like the way Krungman obviously records their stuff is phenomenal. Dap Kings, Sharon Jones, and Gabe Roth, the way they record. Who else? There's some like newer groups that are hip to that use that sort of reverby vibe, and it makes me want to sample it and make beats out of it. That vibe,
Were you monitoring the reverb as you tracked, or was that in post?
That was post. We had the plate running for a lot of, especially in the Lettuce stuff. We had the plate in the studio on and in our headphones, so we could actually hear and play with the verb. So you're not going to do that feel that goes if you got that verb in your ears and the compression, you're going to go do something simple.
Yep.
Because you're hearing like this finished record, almost demo, sound in your cans, which I'm a huge fan of. Because you hit differently with the compression on, with the slight distortion on the snare, bottom snare, or like the jump mic, which captures the dirt of the room. You compress that, and it's got the AM radio vibe. You turn that up in your cans, and all of a sudden you play a little differently. You play more to the sound as opposed to trying to fit your acoustic clean drums to a sound after, you know?
Mm-hmm. Do you do the same thing when you're doing like more like modern, real punchy sounding records? You have your cans sound as close to the finished product as possible?
Absolutely, yeah. It makes such a difference.
So what is the difference for you playing into a reverb versus playing into a real punchy compressor? Like, what do you do on the drums differently?
I mean, it's different eras, one. Different tunings for the kits. Like for reverb, I want the coated Evans classic jazz toms with a 14-inch floor and less muffling in the kick, a little more tone, 2 ride cymbals, for the reverby stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's a Bernard Purdie solo album. I forget what it's called, but it's got a song called Pretty Purdy. Boom.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like the reverb opens up on 2, and it's like just the penultimate 1968 drum sound,
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing more amazing. And got to talk about Sissy Strut and the first Meters record, the first Kool and the Gang record, like the early that stuff. It's all 60s tuning, 60s style drums, And then when you go tight, you're dealing with the 70s now. If you're talking funk, you're talking, early 70s James, which is like, Say It Loud and Black and Proud, like that era. Then you got mid 70s James, which is a little tighter. Funky drummers more. I think that's early 70s. And then as you get into 75, 76, 77, you're moving towards disco. And then you're dealing with deep snares, no reverb at all, padded drums, tape drums, which is also super cool for certain tunes, So each you write by era, and you try to bring in a little bit of some modern shit after. But I like to kind of create for these projects based on like an era specific thing.
I need I think, was that Pretty record called Soul Drums?
Yeah, Soul Drums. That's
it's him like looking up on a Blue Sparkle kit maybe or something like that.
Oh yeah, I recommend all your listeners to check out Soul Drums by Bernard Purdie. It's a funny record, and when it goes to just drums, you play that for your engineer when you go to make a record and say, "Make my drums sound like this." And see how close they can get.
Give me some recommendations for Idris Muhammad records. I think he is kind of unsung these days.
Yeah, I was just talking to someone. I'm drawing a blank. I was just talking to someone about. It might have been an Instagram thread or a Facebook thread, and we were going crazy on "Ode to Billy Joe," which is a song that Idris is on. Is to me the ultimate Idris performance in that style of 60s breakbeat. Yeah, but it's that era of Idris. And he played on Nautilus by Bob James, which is classic. And they're both similar beats. But the Ode to Billy Joe is the one that Kanye sampled for Jesus Walks. I mean, it's a huge hit, and it's all Idris, And he put like some like auto-tune vocals on top of an Idris break. And it's got this giant buzz roll to it's like that. He goes all the way to beat 1 with his like kind of press rolly slop thing that he does that's so incredible. And a lot of people they don't take their ghost notes and press rolls as importantly, or they don't see them as big sounds. But to me, they're like, that's really what it is. That's really what it's all about for that style,
Speaking of ghost notes, I've noticed on some of your lessons on Deitch Academy that you play the ghost notes kind of high. Is that because you're trying to replicate that compressed sound?
Absolutely. And I grew up playing in like New York clubs where the sound guy barely would even mic the bottom snare mic, or, just like little clubs in New York, they throw a mic on top. And so it's like, if you're not actively pressing into the drum to pull out those ghosts. Like people are just going to hear boom, got, boom, got. You might as well not even play them, like at that point, so my thing was like, let me accentuate these, because one, that's what I like when I'm sampling or like making, that's what I like in hip hop are those ghost notes. And that's because it was sampled through an MPC and it has this like in compression in it that like brings out the, of the snariness of it and the dirt of it, the bottom snare sound,
Do you play that way when you're tracking as well to bring out the ghost notes, or is that different for studio?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times with the compression that I have in my headphones, and a little bit of distortion I put on the bottom snare mic, I don't need to really accentuate them as loud because they're getting pushed through with the plugin or whatever,
I wanted to talk about
it's mostly a live thing where I really pull it out.
Right. Let's talk about the difference between, because the similarities and difference between hip hop drumming and classic funk drumming. Because a lot of times it's James Brown breakbeats, but how would you approach playing them, the two different situations?
I mean, there's definitely, there's a, father-son relationship between funk breakbeats and hip hop drumming, and, funk drumming is the forefather of hip hop style. Questlove, who is by and far the most prominent hip hop drummer of our generation, grew up playing along with Average White Band records, and Steve Ferroni, who was also my alma mater because I spent 3 years with them in the early 2000s, playing with them. And I got to meet Steve and hang out with Steve, and I got yelled at by Steve.
Wait a minute, for what? For what? What are they yelling at you for?
I mean, he came to a gig in LA and it was his first time seeing us. And I took some liberties with the kick drum patterns. I kept the hi-hat and snare the same. I wasn't doing fills or splash cymbals or fusion fill, none of that, I just kind of gave the kick drum patterns a little bit more of a Jay Dilla. That's what I was into. And that's when Jay Dilla was just coming into prominence, and I was getting into my, hip hop style kick drum stuff, and extra shuffle on it and a couple extra that kind of stuff. And he got pissed and sat me down. And it was like, I played those kick drum parts for a reason. On those records. They're on those records for a reason. And I was like, yes, Mr. Ferroni, sir. I'm very sorry. Please forgive me.
That's amazing. Like, Steve, you're not in a band anymore.
No, he is. He is. I just felt like I didn't want him to be to feel like I was being disrespectful. I was very respectful, and if I had really known he was in the crowd, I would have played his fills verbatim, like I played for the past 3 years. Like I had played his book on that gig, for the past 3 years. But I was in LA, a bunch of producers were there and friends, and dare I say, people of my generation, and I wanted to play, the music. I wanted to play the kick drum parts that night. And of course, that's the night that Steve was there. Such is life. But, it's cool. I tell that story to a couple of my old school, like funky friends, and they laugh their asses off. They're like, Dad, I'm telling the story. I yelled at by Steve,
It's pretty amazing.
But, Steve, I have the utmost respect for him. And he's almost, if Questlove is the godfather of hip hop drumming, and he grew up playing along Steve Ferrone, what does that make Steve Ferrone? The super daddy of hip hop drumming, But what producers did is, and what the MPC gave to live drumming through Jay Dilla, Pete Rock, DJ Premier, Just Blaze, guys like that. What that gave to live drumming was a whole different thing. It went backwards. Like, okay, these are the drum machines. of the day, and they were sampling bits and pieces of funk breaks. Public Enemy also with the Bomb Squad, Hank Shockley and Keith Shockley. They would take pieces of different drum loops and place them together, and sometimes they wouldn't always line up. That became a sound. That became a thing, You take a hi-hat that's from a ballad, and then you set the click to 90, and all of a sudden now those hi-hats are dragging. So you sampled something that was a much slower tempo, but you're set the click to a higher tempo, and now you have a slanky ass hi-hat in between notes. Your downbeats are the same, but the in between, the unaccented hi-hats are now slower than they would be if you had just gone tit. So hip hop gave something and created a rhythmic sort of plate for live drummers to pick from and to add to their vocabulary.
Was that due to the limitation of the gear or the limitation of available breaks at the time? I mean, because nowadays you could quantize it, and I mean, if that stuff would have happened now, we never would have got those feels, right? Or
yeah, exactly. Pete Rock and Dilla were the first to kind of turn the quantize off. I think Premier also, his kick drum parts are some are swung and some are straight, and it sounds like he played his kick drums. He might have quantized his snares to be on 2 and 4, but hi-hat and kick drum is really where the swing comes from. People talk about moving the snare early. I'm like, why'd you keep the snare on time and just mess around with the swing in between the downbeats, and maybe flam the hi-hat downbeats after the kick and after the snare, and see where that takes you. That's a hip hop concept. That's not, George Clinton liked it behind the beat. Dennis Chambers talks about the one being big and heavy, and you still feel the time, the metronomic time, but the one maybe slightly underneath it. And that last 4 before the one might be slightly underneath where the metronome is click, 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 and that bass drum, and that, that feel is a little dip, So George Clinton definitely, and James was into that dip in the one, a pocket. It's where the idea of a pocket, because it looks like a pocket if you envision it, that's how I see it. I don't know. Explain pocket 1,000 different ways, but so I think those guys are the forefathers of what hip hop drumming is seen as today. There's a huge connection, but Steve Ferroni is like sort of like the uncle to, if Questlove is, the golden child of hip hop drumming,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear that. I think you explained that in one of your lessons on Deitch Academy as well. You're talking about that unquantized kind of feel. Mm-hmm. I often hear, maybe I'm wrong, I hear drummers do the opposite. They might rush the snare, and that seems to be not the right approach.
I mean, that might work. I think, Chris Dave is known for that a little bit, but I think playing the hi-hat late after the snare is what creates the illusion that the snare is early, because the hi-hat is a higher pitch. Mm-hmm. And we have a tendency as human beings to hear that hi-hat as the dominant time, because it's like right there. Tit, 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 tit. But honestly, the way Chris plays it, and he lays it back, and the way Questlove plays it, the hi-hat is really kind of draggy, and it creates the illusion that the snare is early. That's in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Is there one Dilla record that you would say kind of set the template for this vibe?
No, that's like saying one Miles record or one Coltrane record.
Right.
It's like I would honestly, for drummers out there, I go to YouTube and I type in Dilla mix, and there's like 10 of them or 20 of them, and you put the headphones on, you sit at your drums, and just go through as many hours of that as you can. and you're going to find all kinds of different feels, and some aren't that crazy. Some are straighter than you would imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not everyone's like exaggerating it.
Yeah.
And sometimes the way he did it was really subtle, and that's why I like the way, Quest does it. He because he was friends with Dilla and he knows the whole discography. He understands the subtlety in the way Dilla did it, as opposed to the very brazen style that Chris kind of popularized.
Mm-hmm.
Now Chris is kind of dialed back on it. But at first, like when he started messing with the Dilla style, it was like like triplets on the hat, that kind of, and it was him just like messing with a new feel, and a new thing. And now you're hearing with D'Angelo, you're like, oh yeah, there it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, is there like a cautionary word for drummers when you start dipping into like how far is too far, and when is it even appropriate to kind of go into that vibe?
It's song specific.
Mm.
If you're writing tunes in that style, or there's some jam bands messing with that. Like there's some like pop acts messing with. There's a great book that just came out, Dilla Time. You know about this?
No, I have to check it out.
It's written by a producer cat, forget his name, but he really is explaining Dilla's stuff in rhythmic, almost like to non-musicians about how the drums swing. And it's really interesting the way he's breaking it up. He's drawing grids, and here's a normal grid with just boxes. Here's a Dilla grid where these lines are closer to each other. And my writer friends and my like general hip hop friends are like, wow, this is mind melting. Like, and I'm like, I've been talking about this in my clinics for 10 years, but like the guy visually explained it in a way that no one has visually explained it. And, and I did some studying with some like Moroccan musicians in New York, and a lot of the Moroccan stuff, it's so not metronomic, but they're still filling the quarter note, but it's moving around this triplet meets straight thing.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I feel that in Dilla stuff. I feel that Moroccan, that North African rolling, and Brazilian. There's some Brazilian funk and Brazilian grooves that are like, and like they're not perfect and they're not straight eights, but it's funky. And Dilla was sampling all this stuff, and then he kind of like he absorbed it and started doing it by hand with his fingers, and so it's a beautiful art form. I advise all drummers and Dilla fans to check out this Dilla Time book. I don't have it yet, but I will soon.
When was the acoustic kit brought back into hip hop? I have a hard time pinpointing when the first time I saw a live drummer with a hip hop artist. I think like
the biggest
Dance Squad.
The biggest live drums hip hop song that blew hip hop worldwide was Sugar Hill Gang, Rapper's Delight. I heard Dennis Chambers recut that because originally that group was from something else, and then they recut the tune. Oh yeah, it was Chic, Good Times. And the idea was to use the Chic beat and to have two guys from Harlem rap over it. That was like the big first pop rap song, which was live drums, which gives me hope that it'll return to live drums entirely one day. I mean, Robert Glasper was achieving a lot. With all the MCs, he's bringing rappers into his fold and making sure it's Chris or Justin Tyson on drums, and those guys are very capable of playing like an MPC, like a Dilla record. And then it's up to the engineer to really EQ it right, What was your question again?
Yeah, well, like when did the live drummer kind of get back into the hip hop scene? Like I think of like the early '90s when there was kind of like the hip hop rock meshing.
on the album Raising Hell by Run DMC, which sold like millions of copies, there's a song called Perfection that not a lot of people know, and it's live drums all the way through. And I always felt like I was a serious fan of the song, and it kind of, me being able to play it in elementary school, in school band, and like the other kids seeing me play it, and they're like, "Oh, can you play Perfection?" And I was like, "Yes, I can. I know it." And it's a go-go beat, and go-go music from DC is definitely the older cousin of hip hop. It's between funk and hip hop. It's right in that middle place. And bands like Trouble Funk, and they created that boot, got boot, boot, got boot, got boot, boot, got just that over and over dependable kick drum pattern, 2 and 4 in the snare, some funky hats with a little couple triplets and open hats here and there. And that's what laid the groundwork for early hip hop 1,000%, and that's what that song was. Run DMC was basically the song Perfection was a go-go beat, just slowed down. And also DJ Yella for NWA played drums on a couple of early NWA cuts.
I didn't know that.
Those were all big for me. Like, those were like, I found them. I found like real live drums on a real hip hop record, which is mostly machines, and it was like the holy grail of live drums in these are like 80s, late 80s, early 90s. And then it was all MPC for, until like, live drums on like popular hip hop records. Yeah. The rap rock thing was happening, but I never really got too heavy into that. Cats would rather sample 4 bars of Idris Muhammad than have me come in and cut it because of, one, the recording quality, the kind of mics they used in 1969, the tape machine, all that, So that's kind of why drum. I listened back to like, I got to play on a couple hip hop records, like Quality. I got to play on a couple of his records, and I listened back. I'm like, the engineer wasn't really, didn't really. I did one thing. We did a Dilla tribute with Russ Elevado, and I don't even know if that came out, but one of the songs came out. It was a Mad Lib beat that we played over, and I cut drums over it, and that was mixed really well. It's a lot of factors, knowing the groove, knowing the vibe, and the engineer knowing the vibe. If all those come together, you have live drums in hip hop, but it's really hard for all those things to fall in place.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever use electronics, or is it you strictly acoustic?
Yeah. For Break Science, I'm doing all that and coming up with all kinds of electronic drum sounds, and I'll lay electronic drum sounds first, then I'll put live drums over that, and then I'll end up taking the kick drum from the live drums out and just leave the snare in the hat and add another giant clap on top of 2 and 4 and put an 808 where the kick was, or line up 808s to the kick. I like the combination of live and electronic drums. I think, I never got into triggers. I feel like I would have been hooked if I did, because I would have got used to like the combo sound.
Mm-hmm.
And, but, I stayed away from it because it requires a lot. Nowadays it's easy. You load your sounds into an SPDX and you get 2 triggers and you go from there, one on the snare, one on the kick, and you're ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to start doing that soon. I keep saying that year after year. I'm going to start doing it soon. I'm still doing the pads. If I want an 808, I'll just hit it with my pad like that.
Okay. And so that's the Break Science setup. You might have some pads on stage, or use electronics.
Yeah, and Lettuce. We have the trapezoid song, which certain parts of the song I'm just playing the pad.
Mm.
And the crowd digs it, and it's a nice switch up from acoustic drums. Like, okay, they've been hearing this kit for an hour. Now I'm going to play these pads, which is based off a Roland TR-808 drum machine, which is the opposite of live drums.
Mm-hmm.
Which, there's nothing more different and there's nothing more dominant on the radio than 808 drums, and dominant in the world right now. And it's the most non-organic drum sound you could possibly have,
Yeah, when did that machine come out?
What's that?
When did that machine come out? It has to be like 40 years old now.
Yeah, it's an 80s, definitely an 80s. Yeah, there's a whole documentary on the 808 on YouTube. You look up like 808 doc, and you can learn all these things about how it affected music and, where it's at today. And people are still doing it and still evolving that. And it's like, I'm hoping that live drums, like this guy, AJ Hall, you heard AJ Hall yet?
Mm-mm.
Does like live drumming for rap records. Like he makes drum loops for rap records,
Mm-hmm.
And he's really got his studio dialed where it sounds like old, super amazing old breaks. And then there's some artists like, Benny the Butcher and Griselda who are signed by Jay-Z. They're blowing up, and most of their beats are live drum samples and not 808s, which I'm like, God, it's finally somebody popular is using live drums,
Yeah.
whether they're a sampled breakbeat or my friend AJ or whatever, like it's a kick and a snare and record dust, which I'd rather hear at this point. But I love 808s too. Break Science, we use that. Sometimes you just want to cut. You want that 808 and you want that high pitched snare, and I've been using the stack claps a lot, which really have become a can't leave home without it sort of situation.
Yeah, I see that everywhere. That's kind of replaced some of the other tricks of like putting the splash on the snare and some other stuff.
I did that for years. I did the splash and it kept moving and falling off and flying off the snare, So now you could hit the snare and, I used to hit the splash on the snare and the side snare at the same time. Or put the splash on the side snare and hit them both at the same time. This kind of thing. And now I just do that with the stack clap and the snare. It's flat. And now I move the stack clap to next to my hi-hat. So, if I'm doing, it's easier to get, it's like right there. It's flat, as opposed to going across my body and going, that's where I was setting it up on my right side. And now I find it's kind of easier to get to, and it's less movement and more economic to do it on the left side.
Does that negate the need for the pad with hand claps, or you have that there as well?
The pad's all the way on my left, like behind the hi-hat, like on the side here. Okay. Stack clap is between the crash cymbal and the hi-hat and the rack tom. So it's right in there. I got to raise the crash up a little higher to get it in there.
Right.
But it's really working out. I did that setup on the last couple Lettuce tours, and it feels really natural.
Sweet. All right, so let's talk snare drums for a couple of minutes, then we'll wrap it up. If I said I need a classic James Brown breakbeat sound, what drum would you grab, and then how would you tune it and treat it?
It's Hammer.
What material?
They know about the acrylite. They know about, the beauty of the Ludwig stuff, and they, and all that classic sounds, what's the Ludwig one? It's not
the Superphonic.
I mean, the acrylite's one of them. What's the real,
the Superphonic? The
Superphonic. Yeah. But I feel like Tama just upped the ante with lugs that don't move, that, and the throw offs are the best. And this is a cool little Tama commercial, but everyone always asks me, like people hear my recording, they're like, "Oh, what is that? The acrylite or is that the Superphonic?" I'm like, no, it's like they were sending me the SLP models are great, like they sound amazing. people always think they're vintage snares. It's like, no, I just beat the head up until it sounds old. And
that's the trick. It's got to be
so a lot of it's head. You know, a lot of it's like a brand new head might be too rangy.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to kind of hit that paint out the middle of it, you know, for a while until it deadens the head a little bit, and you need less tape. And, you know, the goal is to get it to a point where you don't need tape. It has a little bit of ring, and it's nothing muting the head. But, you know, as opposed to like, going, it's like, okay, you know, like that perfect amount, you know.
Now, what about like a 70s punchy vibe? Would you use the same drum, or would you swap it out?
Well, I back then, you know, I obviously use a deeper drum, but now with big fat snare drum.
Mm-hmm.
Like, are you kidding me? Like, what an amazing invention, you know?
Right.
Like, you know, especially if you're on a gig and, you know, you're playing Funky Drummer 1 minute with the high snare, and the next tune they call is like Billie Jean or something. You're on a wedding gig. You got to play Billie Jean now. Throw that big fat snare drum on, you know, and it's right there. So it kind of saves a lot of, you know, if you don't want to bring multiple drums to a gig or a session, you know. Yeah, so that's a definite go-to in the studio for me.
Does your cymbal setup change much?
A little bit. I just got some Caropes. I was using the K's with lettuce for a while, and they were feeling too bright. And I feel like the guys were getting annoyed with the bell or the cymbal really cutting. And I wanted them because they cut through a big band. And now, like, we have the cymbals mic'd and everyone's got ears. And it's like, I don't think I need to cut through anymore. I think I need to blend a little more with the guys, you know? So I really dig the Caropes for their dark blend of the bell's not piercing anyone. And when you play them, you know, you crash on one. It's not like this, like, it's like, it's a nice vibe that sounds good in your ears and doesn't distract the musicians from their solos. If I start playing crashes and doing stuff, you know, they're not freaking out.
Sweet. Last question. The Deitch Academy. What was the reason for developing that, and how often are you going to be updating it?
I update it all the time. I have, again, part of my videos that I have to download are all lessons that I just do on my phone when I'm feeling inspired for a lesson. I teach the way I like to learn, a little background, talk about the history of that particular beat, the drummers that influence this beat. I kind of have like a system with that. You know, I want you to know the whole thing, where I got it from, and I just really enjoy teaching, and I've been right there with incorporating hip hop and funk and drum and bass and electronic and all that sort of stuff for a while now, and I like to share that. I think going to the grave with it is a waste. You know, like, listen to my records if you want to learn. You know, like, that's how a lot of cats are. I'm like, no, I like to break it down and show you where it came from, and you know, it makes, you know, it just demystifies it a little bit and lets people understand what you're thinking when you go into that sort of bag.
It's really cool. I've dug through the whole thing twice already, so I've learned a lot.
Oh, wow. So you're saying put some more videos.
Yeah, I'm like, come on, man, I need some more.
Okay, all right. No, for real, I mean to get in. I had last month off. I could have recorded 30 of them. But it's all right. I'll definitely knock those out. Thanks for reminding me.
Yeah, right on. So are you hitting the road soon? How should people keep up to date with what you're doing? Yeah,
Lettuce Funk, www.lettucefunk.com is where the bulk of my touring is.
Mm-hmm.
Everything around that will be like an Instagram post. So just follow me, Deitch Adam, at Deitch Adam on Instagram. I'm also Real Deitch Beats on Twitter. I just, say random things on Twitter and also announce gigs and stuff like that. Facebook is mainly just for friends and family, and asking questions. But Instagram's got all the things that are outside of Lettuce. But I should have a master Deitch calendar that people can access. It probably does exist somewhere, but I'm not quite sure where. There's a lot of stuff moving, and a lot of moving parts with that.
And that's it for this week's episode. Hope you enjoyed my chat with Adam. Again, go check out his educational site, Deitch Academy, and then also take a listen to all of his bands, Lettuce, the Adam Deitch Quartet, Rig Science, any number of things. He's always got something in the works, so make sure you go to his website, like you said, and follow what he's doing. And if you dig the show, please drop us a review over on iTunes, wherever you get your podcast, 5-star rating. All this helps us get into more feeds so more drummers can see us all around the world. And that's it for this week, so we'll see you next week. Have a good one.